Hello. Thank you so much for having us. Very excited to be here today with a wonderful panel about mainstream adoption. How are we going to get these users? How are we going to grow our numbers? How are we going to get everyone onto this Web3 thing? I will introduce myself and then would love to have you guys go around and intro yourselves, and then we'll get started with questions. I'm the founder and CEO of Serotonin. We bring breakthrough technologies to market. I started out as the chief marketing officer of Consensus, the Consensus with a Y, not the Consensus with a U, the one that made MetaMask, and then started Serotonin about 4 years ago to bring the best practices that we developed inside of Consensus to some of the other projects in the space. So very happy to be here. Edwin?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for everybody's attention at 4 o'clock slot here. My name is Edwin Naoki. I am not the CTO of PayPal, although that would be a nice promotion. I am the CTO of PayPal's blockchain, crypto, and remittances unit. I've been in this role about 4.5 years. Prior to that was about a decade as PayPal's chief architect. And before that, all sorts of things in the internet space, including Netscape that you might have heard of, AOL that you might have heard of, and then a handful of startups in the Silicon Valley. Really great to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Brandon Kumar. I'm the co-founder of Layer 3. We help protocols acquire users on chain. So we've built infrastructure that acts as a two-sided marketplace. On one side, you have large Layer 1 and Layer 2 ecosystems that typically allocate $1 million+ grants to us, which we then use to route as incentives to consumers who come to our platform to learn and discover apps across 30 different chains, both on the EVM and Solana ecosystem. And prior to Layer 3, I was an investor at a large fund of funds in the industry called Accolade Partners.
So to kick us off, this cycle, we've heard about institutional adoption a lot. The institutions are finally here. In fact, one of them's even on this panel. On the flip side, a lot of institutional adoption has taken the form of ETFs and products where people don't have direct sovereign root ownership of their assets. Are we going to see a world as this gets more adopted where people actually directly own crypto, or are we going to see more intermediation and wrappers as institutions get into the space? You want to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, and maybe Brandon, you've got some thoughts on this too. But I think that it's a good question, but I think it actually focuses on the wrong thing, right? I mean, we're here because we really believe that there's a space for decentralized finance. We believe that there's a meaning and a reason why people should have the option to have their own assets and be in control of their own destiny. But that's not necessarily how everybody is going to choose to interact with this system. Some people, for example, will prefer to trust a company like PayPal or Venmo to custody their assets for them. That has certain advantages in terms of the fact that they don't necessarily need to deal with that complexity or the loss, that we can perform certain functions on their behalf with their approval. But the key, I think, is always being able to have that option to be able to move into a self-custodied space, to be able to move into full decentralization. And I think that what's really unique about this moment is that you can have the best of both worlds. You can have institutions that act as an on-ramp for the asset. You can have ETFs and other sort of large mechanisms that get people comfortable and provide liquidity in the marketplace. And you can also have the option of self-custody and full decentralization in the same asset class, and really allows folks to be able to move from one to the other pretty seamlessly.
So you are a pluralist. There are lots of different options, some centralized, some decentralized, some with true root ownership, some with intermediation.
Yeah, I think it's already all about choice, right? I mean, the reason why decentralization is interesting and important is because we're all about choice. We're all about being able to exercise where we put controls in the system, where we put both control and controls in the system. And I think that the idea that we can actually move seamlessly from centralized through decentralized, from individual to institutional, from sort of, and being able to bridge the world of traditional finance and the world of DeFi, I think is actually really groundbreaking.
Brandon, I'm curious if you agree with that. As the institutions arrive, how is that changing the shape of adoption?
Yeah, I agree with most of what Edwin said. I think if you look at the industry over the past 10 years, having control over your own assets was infinitely more important to that cohort than it will be over the next 10 years. And so, like, you know, in my prior role, one of the core responsibilities I had was helping raise capital from institutions. And at the time, you know, these institutions didn't have an easy way to access any of the major assets. And so they looked to early stage fund managers. And so we were able to raise a fund of funds product, and we then invested in a lot of the, you know, the prominent venture firms of that era. Nowadays, I mean, that demand is still there, but you're right in that they're going to the ETFs, and they really do not care about sort of whether or not they have direct ownership of it. They trust the custody solutions that are out there. And then even on the retail side, I think you're starting to see solutions that are kind of a hybrid, like Privy or Capsule, that are making the onboarding process much easier. And again, like, you can choose to have complete ownership of those assets, but it's not 100% there. And I think that as we look to the next decade, it's going to be far more about the profit incentive and far less about the properties around ownership, for the next 10 years.
So it's going to be applications bringing in these users, and some of those applications will be institutional and will be intermediated, and some of them will offer direct ownership. Maybe you guys can talk about which applications you think are going to bring the most people in, because we've seen these different waves. You know, last cycle we had NFTs bringing a lot of people in. This cycle, is it meme coins? Is it going to be something else? What are you seeing as the great onboarder?
Yeah, so I think there's two cohorts. You have the first cohort, which is I have a clear profit incentive, therefore I'm trying to find a way to find that profit on chain. And these are people who are already actively here today, but the use cases that excite them are trading, speculation. You know, I think that is like product market fit in and of itself. And we've seen that recently, like Pump.Fund, Polymarket. Like, consumers want to trade any market, anytime, any asset, any outcome, all the time, and crypto enables that. The second cohort, which I think we might get into a little bit later, is, you know, there are 1.6 billion people that are unbanked, 2/3 of which actually have access to the internet. And so their product market fit is just stablecoins. It's access to financial services that they otherwise didn't have access to. And that is huge product market fit. I think anyone who has experienced a business that has global payments attached to it understands the complexity that, like, stablecoins now solve. Obviously, you guys understand this deeply. And so that's going to be the use case that brings a lot of those people on chain, is just the ability to access banking in a way that they haven't in the past.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that there's, beyond that, I do think that there will be certain decentralized applications, the Farcasters of the world, some of these, a new class of gaming and entertainment that will have the need to have certain tokens and payments that are associated with those that are probably in that, I don't know that I would call it that speculative case, but really sort of in that first class of sort of unique incentives. But obviously, from PayPal's perspective, we're right there with you in terms of the advantages from a money transmittal and value movement perspective. You know, it's not just the unbanked. I mean, you know, you have folks. You know, we have a VC arm as well called PayPal Ventures. We're starting to do a lot of our funding with the PayPal stablecoin now, because you can do it on weekends, you can do it at night, you can sort of move funds when the banking system is closed. And the idea that you could have a banking system that closes, you know, in 2024 in the internet age is actually kind of silly, right? So you actually have this ability to take advantage of real-time, low-cost, cross-border, and that, I think, is going to start to, you know, those advantages are what's going to cause people to take a moment and say, hey, there's a better way of doing something. And that's going to draw people in.
You know, it's funny, that quality of being able to send payments whenever you want. I've been seeing people using crypto for the UX because it's better UX. Do you want an easy cap table? Launch a token instead of having a complicated, notaries and forms and Carta and this and that. You want to send someone a payment? Just send them an on-chain payment. Don't mess with ACH or Swift. And so I think for especially younger builders and startups and just people transacting, it has easier UX than actually this formal system where you wait in line at a bank. Does that resonate at all? Do you see people adopting this for ease of business and keeping things digitally native?
I think that there's a difference. I would say that there's a difference between sort of easy UX and clear advantages, right? I mean, I think that, for all of us here, making an on-chain transfer is actually pretty straightforward. My parents will not get this in a million years. And so, I think that what we'll see, and Brandon alluded to this, is that for the folks for which there is a real incentive and a real value proposition for doing this, whether that's folks that are trying to fund their company, people that really need to get funds from point A to point B, people that are trying to raise in a decentralized set of markets, a little bit of hurdle is not a problem because the advantages are so much greater. Compared to scanning a QR code or tapping a card at Starbucks, there's a barrier. And I think that the advantages aren't quite there yet for that audience. And so we're going to need to work hard at the application layer to make those simpler and simpler so that it becomes just as natural and just as straightforward.
Yeah, and we saw this with Stripe's acquisition of Bridge, I think, is a clear endorsement of the fact that this is where kind of the GDP of the internet is going. Like their mission is expand the overall GDP of the internet, and I think stablecoins are going to accelerate that in a way that their API suite over the past, call it 10 years, has not. Because like a small business that has some element of cross-border payments, I think the settlement, you would know maybe, is like it's T+4, T+3. Like it's T0, right? And you also, not to mention the inefficiencies of working capital, because you now have to have, if you're operating a global business, you have to have capital in each sort of jurisdiction. Now you can easily move money without having that inefficiency on working capital. So I agree with the UX point. It's not always the easier UX, but it materially saves your business time and money. And so that incentive is a strong enough incentive. It just doesn't get as much airtime on crypto Twitter because there's no airdrop, right? Like there's nothing that's like activating that audience, but it is a huge part of the on-chain economy. And so I think that's going to accelerate massively in the next 5 years.
Yeah, don't quote me on this, but I think I heard somewhere that the total amount globally of pre-fund that is out in the world is about $3 trillion at any given moment. So, $3 trillion of capital that's locked up, sort of waiting for somebody to come and claim that, just because of the inefficiencies of the financial system.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw a friend get a text from her mom. I've been trying to get into the meme coins. I bought the United States one, but it hasn't been going up. Maybe, Edwin, you can make the case. What is the business case for why every business should use stablecoin rails or stablecoins instead of what they're currently using for payments? Clearly, Stripe, clearly you guys believe that the future is stablecoins. If someone didn't believe that, if someone didn't understand why entities of the size of PayPal are getting into this space, what's that crisp business case for it?
Sure. I'll give you sort of two answers for that, which are really quite complementary. So it's really about cost and time, which really ultimately end up being the same thing. But let's start with time. So we talked with a small business owner. She's an artist. She makes pottery and other goods. She gets her clay sourced from overseas, and she is trying to build a business that allows her to ship her wares overseas. Today, in the traditional payment system, the fact is that she can't actually sell overseas because a lot of her customers in the Middle East and Africa and other potential customers cannot pay her because they either don't have access to international funds and payment methods that will allow her to get there, or they don't have a mechanism by which those trusted intermediaries don't end up taking out a huge amount of cost in the payment system. And when she wants to go and buy her clay, she can't pay them efficiently either. It's either wire transfers, it's credit card payments, it's other sorts of means, which again, just add time and cost to that. And when we talk about cost, if you think about a credit card transaction, let's say you're a restaurant, right, in the US, and I'm using US card rates. You can't not take credit cards if you're a restaurant in the US. Depending upon what cards you use, you'll generally pay about 3% for the privilege of being paid. If that person that comes in, say you're in a major metropolitan area, if that person is from overseas and they're paying with a foreign card, add another percent and a half to that. So you're talking about 4.5% right off of the top of your business for the privilege of being paid for goods that you're providing. And in the restaurant business, margins run somewhere between 2 and 5%, right? So if you think about sort of where that comes in and how much of that is eating into the ability to pay your staff, to be able to buy your ingredients, to be able to refine and grow your business, between the time and the money, like those are game changers for businesses.
Yeah, I'm curious, Brendan, you're bringing a lot of people into the space with quests and rewards. And Edwin, you're bringing in a lot of people with stablecoins. Do you think that stablecoins are a gateway into the space, or do you think that most people are going to come in through airdrops and rewards? Like, what ushers people in?
No, I think it's 100% stablecoins are like they're a gateway. I do think there's different audiences. I think the cohort of people who are actively on chain, once they get on chain, I think they're a little bit less. They'll maybe keep and settle their assets in stablecoins, but by and large, like their goal on chain is very different than someone who perhaps is in, LATAM or Africa, and their goal is simply they want to access, banking services in a different way. Maybe over time you'll start to see the two blend, but I'm not sure that's totally the case today. And you see this as well. Like, I was talking to someone who is at WorldCoin, and they cover APAC, but they were talking about a large portion of their user base is based in Latin America. And these people, the only reason that they're using that app is because they want to earn like this WorldCoin token, because in the US, the daily rewards probably can't even buy you a cup of coffee, but there it like gets you very far. And so I think you're starting to see a blend of people who come on chain through stablecoins, and then they find out that, well, if I actively use these protocols, maybe there's a way for me to, fund a larger part of my life.
My question for you about the airdrops and rewards. So especially in rising economies, in emerging markets, people are arbitraging the cost of living and having more purchasing power and farming airdrops and getting rewards from crypto projects that give them more purchasing power in their market. What is that arb? Where is that value coming from? And are they going to get their money's worth?
Yeah, it's sort of a more nuanced question. So, look, at the end of the day, one of the things that has infinite bid from venture investors is like new forms of block space. And the very simple calculus is, well, there's a 1% chance that I fund the next Ethereum, that's higher EV than a 50% chance I fund the next killer app. Over the past few years, we haven't seen an app token break the top 20 by market cap. So that means that there's a huge incentive to fund new L1s and L2s. To successfully build a new chain, you need a lot of capital. So you can then go to VCs and say, well, I need a $50 or $100 million round. Those VCs also need to put that money to work, so they put $10, $20 million to work in these chains. So then those chains need to have some type of exit path, and that path is to launch a token, of which, again, the market says, well, you might not be producing the same level of metrics that Ethereum or Solana are, but you're going to trade maybe at a few billion. And we've created this incentive where the users understand that trade, and so then they actively use these protocols. And I think the only way that part of this industry starts to slowly go away is if the incentive is no longer there, and that just hasn't happened yet. But also at the same time, in order for these chains to grow and thrive, that incentive kind of has to exist. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg.
Well, I think that the other thing that Brandon, you were mentioning is that some of this arbitrage actually ends up also being a currency arbitrage, right?
Being
a currency arbitrage, because
Totally.
A lot of these tokens and chains are funded in dollars. If you're talking about LATAM, if you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, there are places where there are wild currency fluctuations that happen. Your store of value is actually significantly better if you hold on to your tokens that are dollar denominated. And entirely aside from the tokenomics of it all, folks are doing better because they have access to a wider range of financial products and a global range of financial products. And I think that what that really shows is that people can be very sophisticated when the incentives are aligned, and when folks understand that with a little bit of effort that they can actually do much better for themselves.
I think it would be really surprising for people a decade ago to hear that dollarization ends up being one of the big drivers of people to come on chain. Do you think that's the case, and that's going to continue to be?
I mean, I think up until now, I should say, the dollarization of crypto has followed because that's where the liquidity is the deepest. It is where, in the case of stablecoins, it's where global trade is denominated. All our commodities are denominated in dollars. And so whether or not you're talking about B2B, whether or not you're talking about, swapping for your favorite token, the pools are the deepest when they're denominated against or when they're measured against dollars. And so until those things sort of start to equalize and we start to see more and more regional or local activity happening, I think that you're going to still see the dominance of dollar-denominated assets on chain. But I do think that we have the opportunity to actually start to shift that because we will start to see regional or more specific, maybe even vertical tokens emerge.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I don't have any evidence, or I haven't seen any evidence that suggests, the strength of the dollar on chain is going to go down. If anything, actually, the Bridge founder around the acquisition was talking about the fact that they had a client that was reaching out for the Bridge APIs that was a foreign government who was basically doing all trade in the US dollar, and they were using Bridge APIs to do so. I guess it was a small country. But I see that only continuing as the depth and network effects of the pairs continues to permeate the on-chain economy.
So this all feels pretty logical. In addition to things that we hear about a lot, like games and apps, the things that are onboarding people are rewards, dollarization, payments. That makes total sense. But with that logic in place, why is it already not bigger? Why have we already not completely adopted Web3 for those use cases? What are the hurdles or obstacles that are still holding us back?
I mean, I think compliance is certainly one of them, and I suspect that's a huge part of what you guys have to navigate. But I have some buddies who work at funds like Citadel and Millennium. These are very large hedge funds. And they have working groups within each fund, and they've had these working groups for the past 3 years looking at sectors like DeFi and different assets and alts. They've obviously looked at stablecoins, and the settlement thing is true there as well. They want T0 settlement. The issue is that there's a lot of regulatory ambiguity. And so they can't move size into, in some cases they can't move size through stablecoins, but sometimes they just want to trade these assets and they can't yet. And so I think there's just that risk where these businesses are running $100 billion worth of capital, and they're like, why do I need to tolerate the compliance risk? And then the second component is for stablecoins, and Edwin, this is again more your lane than mine, but I think to operate, even if you are operating global payments through stablecoins, you still need to have the right licenses in each country, and those licenses are extremely hard and cumbersome to get, and so it just takes time.
Yeah, I mean, regulatory and compliance is undoubtedly a factor, but I also don't think that we should discount habits. In most of the developed world, paying for things is actually pretty easy, right? You can scan a QR code with your WeChat or your Alipay app. You can tap a credit card. You can use PayPal. We've been doing it now for decades. It's actually pretty straightforward, and it is certainly good enough for most people most of the time. A lot of, I think, why you're starting to see the activity really start to leapfrog in places like Africa and LATAM and elsewhere is because it's not good enough for them in those areas. And just like we saw, cellular adoption or mobile phone adoption really leapfrog in places like Eastern Europe because, our landlines worked okay and we could pretty much reach anybody. I think you're going to start to see these really innovative use cases, maybe in some of the developing world, start to emerge because they haven't had the opportunity to build up these habits, right? I mean, Japan just got rid of the fax machine in government offices this year. So I think that really speaks to how long it takes for folks to just get untrained from things that are good enough. And that's why I think we start to see a lot of the new users coming in through these entirely new use cases and new apps where they just haven't had the ability to get complacent about things.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we think about onboarding people, we think there are these two forces. There's level of motivation, and then there's amount of friction. And those are the two levers. And so if people, like in emerging markets, are extremely motivated, then they'll tolerate a bit of friction. And if people in post-industrial markets are not very motivated, then even a little bit of friction will set them back a lot. So that's super interesting. Let's talk about the, did you want to?
Well, one more point on that, which I think is interesting from like the investment side, is, there's like a saying that a lot of investment committees have, which is like no one ever got fired for investing in IBM, and I think that also is slowing just like capital deployment from the institutions.
Although IBM's blockchain.
Nowadays, right? So like, I mean, look, I think you have to get to a point where no one has career risk by trying to present solutions in either a corporate or investment environment to adopt the technology, and I think that still exists. I think there's a little bit of like, oh, like you're the little crypto guy, like why are you pitching this technology? And again, it's the stigma slowly going away, but there are like different agency items within large corporates that I think are hard to ignore.
Yeah, we certainly have heard that as well. When we launched PYUSD, we've had a bunch of folks come and say, finally, these are typically the CTOs, the CIOs, or folks in an innovation group saying, finally I can take this to my treasury department, finally I can take this to my CFO, and they'll have heard of you guys. And I think that there is an aspect of that.
An object at rest wants to stay at rest. Got to push on it. So let's say there is super mass adoption, super big use of all this block space. Is it ready? Is the infrastructure actually ready to handle mass adoption? Are there other things that we need to build that aren't ready?
I mean, certainly I think that we're starting to see with the L2s a larger focus on scale and speed than I think that we saw even a few years ago. Everywhere you go, the idea is really trying to get ready for that next billion users. I think that has to do with the performance of the infrastructure. I think it has to do with the regulatory clarity. I think it has to do with the onboarding experiences and frankly the bridges to TradFi, which you're going to need to be able to get these people on board and connect the systems and the applications that they care about. I think that as a community, we are ready for it, and I think that we will be able to stay just ahead of where it needs to be. We've already seen in the last couple of years huge moves in this area. So I'm not worried about where the infrastructure is. I think it's the non-tech stuff that will take more time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think maybe to take the question in a different direction, if you're building consumer use cases, the infrastructure is there. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're trying to build any type of app that's primarily retail facing, you have everything you need. You have onboarding flows through a Privy capsule. You certainly have performance at like the L1 and L2 level. And then all the other tools that surround it, like the Dune API set, like there's everything you need is there. If you're trying to get institutions on chain at scale, there's a whole host of things that I think need to change. But it's the same thing with any cycle. You kind of have supply demand sort of move in cycles, and there's a forcing function that happens where the infrastructure is forced to catch up to that demand. And I think under the new the new administration, that forcing function is going to really accelerate. And so I think it'll be a fun few years to see, the limits of the infrastructure that supports institutional interest in the industry.
Yeah, I think there's also some evolution in the mechanism itself for onboarding. Like a lot of things seem like they're moving to a chat format, and like they're moving to complete abstraction of the actual blockchains and wallets. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, in most of the new trading products today, you do not need to have a wallet. You don't need to understand how to connect that wallet to an app. It's just a normal onboarding or sign-up flow. And then getting assets on chain is also really easy because you've got like a MoonPay integration. You connect your credit card, you get assets on chain, and all of a sudden you're trading on Polymarket or something like that. So I think those types of user flows are only becoming more and more popular and more ubiquitous, which makes it a lot easier for me to go to my college friends who don't work in the industry and say, hey, you should try this product, and they don't need me on the phone with them for 30 minutes walking them through how to use the product.
Yeah, and I think that comes right back to your first question, right? Which is, does that matter in terms of the decentralization? Does it matter that folks don't necessarily know that there's a wallet underneath? And I think the answer is no, as long as you have the opportunity and the option to be able to bridge to that when and if that's necessary.
Well, we've come full circle, and we are at the end of our panel. Thank you so much for your attention, and thanks to our panelists.